Welcome to our podcast on AI in e-forensics. My name is Barry Stanton, and I'm a partner specialising in employment law at Boyce Turner. We live in a world driven by and supported by immense quantities of data. That data is processed and retrievable, and it imposes a huge burden on business, both with regard to litigation and in the form of subject access requests, which have become a weapon of choice for disgruntled employees. Here to discuss technology-aided review, I am joined by Simon Price, Vice President Sales at OpenText LegalTech. Simon is responsible for the European sales for the OpenText LegalTech business, and in particular their Accelerate product, which means that he is very familiar with the way in which legal businesses have interacted with the developing world of artificial intelligence. Simon, hello.
Hi, Barry.
And Professor Mark Bishop of Goldsmiths University of London, who is Professor of Cognitive Computing, ex-chair of the AISB, the world's oldest society for the study of artificial intelligence and the simulation of behavior, and director of the Centre for Intelligent Data Analytics. Mark, hello.
Hi.
Now, artificial intelligence has been a growing and developing field for many years, but its ability to assist with TAR is immense. Its virtues came to the fore for me a few years ago when we completed a huge data exercise at significant cost. There had to be a better, cheaper, and more efficient way to achieve the end result. Mark, can I come to you first and ask you to introduce us to the world of e-discovery?
Thanks. I'd like to introduce us by taking us back in time, because it seems to me that the core problem of e-discovery can be pinpointed back to Plato in his dialogue, the Meno, a Socratic dialogue from 380 BC, in which Plato asks, "How do you inquire, Socrates, into that which you know not? What will you put forth as the subject of inquiry? And if you find what you want, how will you ever know that this is what you did not know?" Well, these questions seem to centrally hit the problem of e-discovery when we're faced with typically a huge corpus of documents or emails and trying to find evidence to aid in an investigation. But it isn't clear from the get-go what that evidence will be, who's going to be revealing that evidence, or when it will be revealed. How on earth can we go about solving this problem? Well, one relatively recent tool that we have in our armory now is the use of artificial intelligence in so-called TAR, or technology-assisted review. And the core ideas for in using artificial intelligence on this problem are primarily twofold. One, can we allow and enable very sophisticated searches to scan through large documents very, very efficiently and bring lots of documents that might, for example, group the words banana, elephant, and Zimbabwe together in some particular order that we might be a bit unclear about. And another kind of inroad into this corpus might be by trying to highlight the types of information that are held within all the documents. Perhaps some documents relate to share dealings, other documents might relate to fuel prices. And it's very useful in the initial phase of our investigation to know what documents relate to what without laboriously by hand going into having to investigate each and every one, which can take a very, very long time. At this point in the technology, there's some very sophisticated platforms that enable and facilitate this type of investigation. Two that I'm a little familiar with, two of the market leaders that I'm a little familiar with, are the Nuix platform and the OpenText platform. And I think Simon will be able to take us through what OpenText can offer on these two projects and problems.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And the word investigate is interesting. You used in the summary there. If we look at traditional approaches to document review, it goes back really to paper and in terms of litigation and predates emails and soft copy documents, but actually to the paper documents where lawyers would sit in a room full of boxes and pick a box that looks like it was the relevant people or date or topic and filter through there looking for what they what they can find to either help with the case or not. And early day discovery systems really kind of replicated that. They allowed you to put all of your data into one database rather than into a box or a series of boxes, and then you could search that data with some sort of rudimentary searching of either keywords or dates or people, perhaps using the metadata, which is the kind of data about the data. So that's the document properties. But ultimately, to know what's in the documents, you had to sift through them and put a team of lawyers into a linear review and thumb through them and start to build up a picture of what's in there. And, going to your analogy or the reference to Plato, or was it Donald Rumsfeld, we don't know what we don't know and the known unknowns. With a litigation or any form of dispute or investigation, you may have a view at the beginning, but that view will certainly change over time as you uncover evidence or information that gives you a better picture. And people often think that the lawyer is just looking for a smoking gun, and really it's rarely the case they're looking for a smoking gun, and most likely they're actually trying to paint a picture and draw together all of the pieces that paint that picture. And one way of finding all those pieces is through that linear review, and it might take you 8 weeks. As Barry said, he was faced with a large review. Maybe a team worked on that for, say, 8 weeks, and by the end of the 8 weeks they had a pretty good idea of what was in there, and perhaps have sort of painted that picture. But really what we want to be able to do is investigate the data earlier, and this is where AI comes in, so that we can start to find those facts and paint that picture at the beginning of the 8-week period, not at the end of it. And also, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to look at documents for 8 weeks. We may only have to look at them for 2 or 3 weeks, because the AI will enable us to decipher which data is relevant to or responsive to our investigation and which data isn't, so that we don't have to look at all of it. And there's a reference made earlier to TAR, or technology assisted review, and that's really that's the broad name giving to the AI and analytical features that e-discovery systems have. And it's not one feature or one algorithm that allows us to do that. It's a number of things. So some examples, and as Mark said, our Accelerate product has a lot of AI in there. So some examples of the things we put in front of the lawyers early on, or in the investigators, are the ability to see who is talking to who. So we have a lot of email or chat, to be able to visualize with a what we call a hypergraph, or a set of communication network map or bubbles, who's talking to who. And that tells us a number of things. It might show us conversations we didn't expect to see, or relationships we didn't expect to see, so some of the unknowns. But also it might show us people that we, again, have a lot of conversation, or have been involved in a lot of the conversation that we didn't think would be. And so maybe we need to actually look at them as a custodian and bring them into the investigation and go and get their data. We could also look at the conversations, or even the data sets, on a time lapse, and see peaks and troughs of where conversations took place. And that again might tell us if there are gaps. There may be data missing, which wasn't collected, or maybe more sinister than that, there may be data missing because it's deliberately been removed, or the conversation was taken out of email and taken elsewhere, maybe into chat or over a phone call. So those analytics will certainly help us just understand who's at play and the timeframes. And the power of those tools are they can be dropped on top of any data set. So as we start to use other analytics, such as concepts or clusters, we will start to see pockets or packets of data, so emails, documents, and so on, based on words and terms that are conceptually related to each other. And I think the example Mark gave was something like fuel prices or share prices. So we may see a cluster of words that indicate a discussion around share prices and FTSE and indices and so on. And we may see another cluster of words around fuel and petrol and gas and litres and gallons and forecourts, which would indicate these are probably more related to fuel pricing and the point of sale. And those clusters are very helpful to allow us to drill into very distinct sets of data. And again, we might not know certain data conversations have taken place, and these clusters might surface those conversations up to us. And so being able to then drill into the data on the share pricing, which is what we're interested in, and then look at that in the context of our hypergraph and see who's talking to who and over what time period, gives us again a much more powerful view of that set of documents. And then all of these together with other things like looking at phrase analysis and other analytical tools allow us to investigate that data. And so without doing any keyword searching, we've actually learned an awful lot about what's in there, and we may have found all sorts of evidence that is in line with what we were looking for. And then finally, at some stage, you probably have to then perform a review of these data sets. You can do the hunting and pecking and finding stuff of relevance, but at some stage you have to do probably a more exhaustive review. In particular, if it's a litigation, you have a responsibility to review that data. And so this is where things like predictive coding, and it has different names, continuous active learning comes into play, which is probably the most powerful of all of our analytical tools. And that allows you to have the system learn from or train itself based on decisions made by humans. So as the lawyers review our packet of documents relating to share price, at the end of a day or a couple of days, when there's a nice set of documents that are responsive to the share price topic, you can say to the system, find more like that, and it will cast its net over the rest of the corpus and bring back things it thinks are relevant. And after a few iterations like that, the system gets a better and better understanding, and ultimately gets to a stage where it says, I can't find anything else that relates to share prices. And at that point, you can then start to sample the data sets and see if, using tried and tested statistical reporting methods, you can test both the responsive and non-responsive sets to see if you really have found everything that might be relevant to the share price dispute. So that's just a summary of some of the analytical features available and how we package them up to help with the investigation, to give you insights into what's in the data, and also to the review to help reduce the burden and the cost of that review in the long run.
Simon, thank you for that. Now, Mark, can you tell us how you got involved in the world of e-discovery?
My background has always been in AI. I've worked in AI since around 1980, which is quite a long time, nearly 40 years, which is over half the time there's been a subject of artificial intelligence. But it's only really in the last sort of 5 or 6 years I got interested in e-discovery. And my work in e-discovery stemmed from a fairly long-standing interest in a difficult but related cybersecurity problem. Is it possible to detect early warning signs of risky employee behavior, so-called corporate threats, from their email communications? And when I ask that question, I'm not asking, can we find simple smoking guns? I'm going to defraud my company tomorrow, for example. But by the analysis of subtle linguistic cues that are in everyday language that employees use, can we foreground signs of changing employee motivation? And my key insight to drive this work was based on an observation by Professor Claudia Aradu, who's Professor of International Relations in the Department of War Studies at King's College London. And she, at a meeting of the European Council for Foreign Relations that I attended, mentioned to me that what people actually do, in other words, their communication transactions, often yields better quality intelligence than what the transactions and communications actually say, the so-called message semantics. Now, this field of what's become known as transactional analytics goes back right the way back to the work of Gordon Welshman in Bletchley Park in World War II. At Bletchley Park, Alan Turing, Welshman's colleague, BBC's icon of the century, was primarily, as we all know, concerned with decrypting German communications, getting a handle on the message semantics, whereas his colleague Gordon Welshman was primarily concerned with message transactions. That German Commander A in Bayeux is communicating to German Commander B in Cairn at 9:17 a.m. on the morning of June the 6th, 1944. Now, when I talked about this at a meeting of CEOs a few years ago, fundamentally misconstruing what transactional analytics offers, the CEO of a major data security company remarked to me, that's all well and good, Mark, but I would never communicate anything sensitive in corporate email communication systems. But because transactional analytics focuses on subtle changes in communication transactions and not what the messages are about, the message semantics, it doesn't really care what topics are being discussed. So if we fell back to the classical systems that are on the market now, traditional e-discovery helps manage complexity by allowing individuals to search through emails and documents by complex search terms and the analysis of concepts and clusters concepts together. But what it doesn't do usually is automatically alert users to anomalies in these communications. Well, my team at the Centre for Data Intelligent Analytics recently split from me, so I lost most of my team. And for the reason that they've set up a spin-out called Fact360, and they're trying to leverage some of the insights we've had over the last few years into some new products. Now, Fact360 is fundamentally based in time. It analyzes documents fundamentally as a sequence of events unfolding over time. And doing this, it can automatically highlight documents that discuss similar concepts over time. Indeed, we use unsupervised AI algorithms to automatically detect the features that best characterize documents and communication channels. And doing this, we can highlight both anomalies on particular modes of communication. Person A is communicating to person B in an unusual way. And we can also highlight similarities. Person X is communicating to person B, but in a way that's very similar to person A. In other words, perhaps person X is using a pseudonym in that communication. So like Gordon Welshman's traffic analysis, this mode of transactional analytics processes language neutral measures. And indeed, Fact360's prestige analytics reveals critical intelligence without ever having to examine the semantics of message contents. And for the investigator, this can be helpful in many ways. For example, imagine processing a corpus of documents which are deeply encrypted. I guess these days, when we think about encryption, we think about environments such as the WhatsApp environment. Or perhaps when we're processing corpuses of documents when we're not allowed to look at what each of the documents is saying. In both cases, these prestige analytics can reveal things like employee impact within an organization, who are the real movers and shakers, and not just those that have been identified as safe by management. And when this, if you like, employee in the loopness changes over time, so revealing proxies for employee satisfaction and dissatisfaction. In contrast, the more language light analysis that Fact360 reveals can do things like, which many of the products can also do, like sentiment, look at message sentiment, LIWC tags, big 5 personality types. But more importantly, we can use these engrams in conjunction with Fact360's Kendall matching engine and ability to learn regular expressions to highlight complex communication structures in documents and messages and communications, such as the use of scripts, and most importantly, in investigation, the use of deviations and scripts.
So, Simon, can you tell us what's happening in the world of AI from your perspective now?
I think, as we've heard from Mark, there are a constantly evolving ways of using AI as it relates in particular to sort of legal document review and investigations. And some of the things Mark talked about there are very interesting, will be great to see coming into practice. And really, I think for the lawyers, it's lawyers are overtly slow to change. So close your ears on that comment, Barry. But lawyers are often seen to sort of change slowly in the way they practice. But actually, over the last few years, have changed significantly. And I think it's been a very steep learning curve for many legal practitioners to have to understand what the technology is doing so they can defend the use of it. But I think they've, broadly as a community and as a market, the legal community has got over that. And there is precedent and case law supporting the use of AI. And so really now it's, which is a great thing, it's sort of pushing the boundaries and constantly finding new areas, such as looking at, sentiment, I think Mark mentioned there, and other ways of being guided by the technologies to what a document or a set of documents will tell you. Ultimately, this all comes down to saving money. The aim for the lawyer working on this is to try and reduce the cost burden for their clients. And having hundreds of lawyers looking at millions of documents is very, very expensive. So I think it's great to see AI playing its part. A lot of law firms have been looking at ways of showing the world they're using AI and looking at things like contract analysis and other areas, but actually they need to look no further than their disputes departments, because many law firms have been using artificial intelligence for a number of years and I think continue to push the boundaries of it to benefit their clients and the greater good.
And I think that's true, but it's also important to make sure it's being used at the right level, isn't it, Simon? Because there's a feeling that the AI is going to do the work, but I think that what both you and Mark have been suggesting is that you need high level input from somebody that really understands what the systems are capable of doing and what the client needs to achieve to actually do a detailed review, rather than pushing that review onto somebody at a more junior level who may not have the bandwidth to understand the key nuances.
Exactly. And that was one of the barriers in the early days, I think, of and still to this extent, getting some of the senior lawyers involved in a case to actually have to do, a little bit of work up front, doing the mundane document review up front to start seeding the system, for example, to start teaching the system, this is what we're looking for. But once the senior lawyers made that effort, then a combination of more junior lawyers and the machine will carry the burden. So it absolutely must be properly considered. It has to form a part of your case strategy, and you need to make sure, as part of, if it's litigation, the e-disclosure questionnaire and all of the budgeting and stuff takes into account how this is going to play out. If one is using technology-assisted review to eliminate documents, you need to be able to statistically prove that they are not relevant, or there is no proportionate reason why you should continue to look at them. So yes, it does require input from senior lawyers. You can't sit back and just expect the person supporting you and their machine to do it all for you. That there absolutely is input, but I think that the overall number of hours spent by the entire legal team is significantly reduced, and that's really where the cost burden sits in disclosure.
The hypergraphs that I was looking at, and you were showing me earlier, they're absolutely fascinating to show the interactions of the people, which gives you a much better analysis than you can ever hope to get just by picking up pieces of paper and trying to trawl through them.
Exactly, and also there's the great thing with e-disclosure tools is they're being used in more and more areas now. So traditional use of e-disclosure solutions was primarily around litigation and maybe arbitration and disputes, and then more broadly investigations. But now if you look at a sort of post-GDPR world, in the UK in particular, there's a significant increase in DSARs, which were touched upon earlier. They're seen as a tactic that people are using to their advantage, and they are a burden with little reward for the recipient. So being able to use e-disclosure tools and things like the hypergraph to be able to very easily see the relevant management, for example, that have communicated with that individual so that you're collecting all the right information, being able to find the personal information quickly, all of those can be very much assisted by the technology-assisted review and not just having to wade through treacle, as it were, with ploughing through the documents in a linear fashion.
So, Mark, are there any developments that you can foresee coming up in the near future within the world of AI and technology-assisted review?
Absolutely. Building on the observations that Simon made, I'm quite interested in so-called TAR2, Technology Assisted Review 2.0. It can be argued that classical TAR reviewers might end up reviewing lots of low-value documents in the review process, and the so-called TAR2, which uses continually assisted learning to try and feed to the reviewers documents that are of higher quality. So the goal for TAR2 is it's going to shorten the review process. So that's something I think we're going to see, if we haven't seen it already, it's going to be working its way into commercial products pretty soon. And then from a more AI point of view, I'm kind of interested in issues around clustering. If you think about, for example, cars, we all know, for example, that BMW now make Minis. You might think of a Mini as a hatchback with 1600cc engine, for argument's sake. There might be a Nissan Micra hot hatch with 1600 cc's. There might be a Ford Fiesta 1600 cc's. Classical clustering algorithms would say, oh, I'll group together all the cars that have a 1600cc engine, and I'll just vertically pick all the cars that have that engine, for argument's sake. But with some of the new clustering algorithms that we've got, we can do some really exciting things. Just think about animals, for example. Each animals you might think of might be carnivorous. Some might be live in water, some might fly, some might have feathers. With some of the new, very new clustering methods that are coming forward, we can begin to automatically, from a set of features, group together all the animals, for argument's sake, that fly, or all the animals that are carnivorous, or all the animals that swim in the sea, without that necessarily being an explicit feature of the data set. And I think this is something that's going to feed through to some of the more exciting cluster analysis facilities that products are going to be offering in the next few years.
And Simon, from your perspective, are there any developments that you anticipate coming through in the area of technology-assisted review?
Yeah, I mean, just to comment on what Mark said, I mean, TAR2, 100% in agreement with Mark on the value of that, and that's something we're using today, and is absolutely the massive differentiator between TAR1 and TAR2. So in other words, the sort of early day approach to what's available now. There is no value in having lawyers looking at junk, as our Americans would say. So yes, I think more products will start to look at bringing TAR2 and continuous active learning into their products. And I think, if we look at what we're doing at OpenText, we're a big software company, so we have a lot of other products at our disposal, and we're embedding those into our Accelerate product. So we're using some of our other AI technologies to bring in things like the sentiment analysis recently and entity extraction, so that we can easily identify as metadata any names of people, places, organizations, and surface those up to the user so they can quickly search for any documents that might contain references to a certain bank or to a certain place or organization. Another area where we've invested in recently, which will be coming out later on this year, is document summarization. So using our Magellan product here at OpenText to actually summarize each of the documents. Particularly useful, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays in criminal disclosure, where there is already a requirement for documents to be summarized before they're presented and handed over to the other side. If the system can have the first pass at summarizing it and the human just edits the summary, that's a lot more efficient and a much quicker approach than trying to write a summary from scratch. So that's some of the areas we've seen recently. And as I say earlier, we'll continue to push the boundaries, and we'll keep looking at more and more AI technologies we have in other products and working out how we could use those algorithms or features to benefit the e-disclosure product.
Simon, thank you very much for your fascinating insight into the world of AI today.
My pleasure, and thank you, Barry.
And Mark, thank you for introducing us to the delights and wonders of Plato, and for showing us your vision of how AI may develop in the future.
Thanks for the invitation to talk today, and cheers.
That was a fascinating discussion with Simon and Mark, looking at the power within and behind technology-assisted review. The tech is amazing and provides business with huge power to review and analyse documents. Whilst we readily accept that the technology exists, understanding some of the theory behind the technology, such as the transaction analysis Mark mentioned, helps us to better understand the power within the technology. As Simon and I discussed, it is very easy to think that the technology will solve a problem, but as with so much tech in business, there needs to be a higher level of human engagement at an early stage to ensure that the full benefit of the technology is realised. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast. I very much hope you enjoyed it. Goodbye.